that could be put into place by communities to influence that change. He is the co-author of the textbook Community Economics, Linking Theory and Practice, and has co-authored the book Targeting Regional Economic Development. Dr. Deller serves on the board of directors for the North American Regional Science Association and the Southern Regional Science Association. Please help me welcome Dr. Stephen Deller.
Good morning. Good morning. Uh-oh. First slide? Oh, there we, oops, Jesus. Back up, back up, back up.
Thank you. My name is Stephen.
I appreciate you all coming out today. It's almost like high school basketball tournament on the Madison campus. Whenever we have that tournament, we know we're going to get a snow day. It's whenever we schedule this conference, I'm going to put on the calendar a snow day. But thank you for coming out and kind of engaging in the conversation about what's happening in the economy and what's happening to the future of our local community here. So if you've been to this before, you kind of notice that I tend to spend a lot of time talking about what's happening to some of the major indicators, like what's happening to the unemployment rate, what's happening to income, what's happening to the population. And I thought I'd just kind of give an overview of that and kind of focus more on another issue that I think is kind of becoming more and more important to a lot of communities when it comes to economic development. I think we all kind of know the story that the unemployment rate is extremely low. Around this area, most of the state, other than the northern part of the state, we have unemployment rates below 3%, which is really kind of viewed by economists as a very, very tight labor market. One of the questions that's been asked is, why can't we get more people into the labor force? And we're actually Wisconsin's kind of historically had a high labor force participation rate, and we're still at that high level. Basically, there is no additional labor that we can tap into. All the people that are able to work basically are in the labor market, and they're kind of working. So we're really kind of at a question now in terms of if we continue to have really tight labor markets, how are we going to proceed to continue to grow? And one of the things that we're doing a lot of work right now is automation. A lot of companies are really looking towards increased levels of automation. And that's going to change kind of the labor market in terms of the types of jobs and types of skills that a lot of firms are going to be looking for. But if you look at kind of what's happening to income in Sauk County, this is a growth index comparing Sauk to Dane in Wisconsin. You see the per capita income's doing fairly well. But a couple of things that are kind of is that after the Great Recession, employment growth in Sauk County really hasn't returned to the level that it was before. We're not really seeing a lot of job growth. And one of the reasons that this might be is the movement towards increased automation. There's a fair amount of manufacturing in Sauk County in the area, and we're seeing more and more manufacturers adopting labor-saving technology. Now, what that means for a lot of companies is that the needs of their workforce is changing. They need higher skilled workers that can work with this equipment, can work with computers, can work with machinery in such a way that their skill sets are a little bit changed. And that is something that the state is going to have to continue to work on. Population growth, you can see that after the Great Recession, population is still growing in Sauk County. And I think you're seeing growth in this particular part of the county because of kind of increased commuting into Madison. One of the things that Matt Kears, a colleague of mine, has been working on is this changing in what we call stretch commuting. And we define stretch commuting as people that travel more than 50 miles one way to go to work. And over the past 15 years, the percent of people that are stretch commuting is really increasing a lot. People are traveling greater distances to go to work, or they're willing to travel greater distances to go to work. Now, we have some hypotheses on what we think that is driving that, but we're really not quite sure. Now, the implication for this part of Sauk County is that, this part of the Sauk County is becoming part of the labor shed of Madison. As I was driving up, it really struck me how many cars are heading south. Okay? Now that creates economic opportunities for the area because more people are choosing to live in this area. And as they choose to live here, that creates economic opportunities. Okay? If you look at the population employment ratio, this is a simple measure of how many people do we have per job. And this number is really kind of, particularly Dane County and Sauk County, is really low. We have about 1.3 people for every job. How can we have with a low unemployment rate and that many jobs per population? It really kind of begs the question is how are we going to support future economic growth? There's a real concern that we're kind of getting into a bottleneck in terms of economic growth, job growth, because we simply don't have the people to fill those jobs. And that's why a lot of businesses are looking towards automation and trying to substitute capital for labor. Okay? But I didn't want to talk about that in depth because I think it's kind of the same pattern that we've been talking about over the last few years. Nothing has really changed that much. But one issue that a lot of communities are really starting to struggle with now is housing. One of the stories that comes out is that communities are wondering, we have all these job openings, why aren't people moving into the community to take these jobs? And one of the things that's popping up is kind of the housing stock, is that we're having a hard time with a lot of folks getting into the question, Sheboygan County, for example, they grew by 3,000 jobs, but they don't have the housing to house the people to fill those jobs. Rural areas are seeing more and more of pressure in terms of rents going up. Labor force housing, closing the affordable housing gap with residents that help employees and businesses. We have a bit of a housing gap. At least there's a perception that we have a housing gap. But it depends. When communities kind of look at their housing stock, they're finding kind of two things. They're finding that either the housing that they have is either good quality and really expensive, or it's not very good housing. And there's a gap in there. There's a gap in the sense of, I want to move into the community, but I can't afford the types of housing that is here, or I don't want to move into this kind of housing because it's not very good. So the question that really kind of came out of Milwaukee is that it's not that the rents are too high, it's that we're generating too many low-paying jobs. Okay, and this is something that we're trying to get a better handle on. But what I wanted to do really is kind of look at what's happening to the housing market here as it relates to economic development. This is a simple housing price index. It is based at the peak of the housing market in 2007. So you can see the housing trends, housing prices going up. It's kind of the same across the area. You see a bit of a housing bubble there, and you see that housing market kind of collapse a little bit. Now the problem, though, I don't have the U.S. on here, but one of the things that's really kind of disappointing for Wisconsin is that this recovery in the housing market has been relatively slow. Well, we can see that it's back up to where it was at the peak of the housing bubble. Okay? Dane County is growing a little bit faster, but you can see that Sauk County's housing market is starting to recover. Now, you would think that if housing prices are starting to go back up, right, you would think, well, demand is going up, supply of housing should go up, right? You should see more housing development occurring. But what's happening, and this is kind of, it looks kind of chaotic, but there's a story here. This is the number of new private housing structures authorized by building permits. It goes back to 1990, and again, we've got these kind of four comparison counties. And you can see it's kind of bouncing around a little bit here. There's a drop down. You can see the Great Recession. But notice the difference here is that in this time period before the Great Recession, the average number of building permits in Sauk County was just over 500. That was kind of the average number of new housing being built, or at least permits that are being offered. But what's happened after the end of the Great Recession is that it's only 145. Why aren't we seeing more housing development? This is provided by U.S. Department of Commerce, the housing unit within there, so it's the reporting to, it's federal data. And it's kind of nice because we're able to kind of compare across places. Now, the thing is that this is single-family housing, okay? This doesn't include like apartment complexes or anything like that. For Dane County, where that data does exist because of the size of it, there is a spike in multifamily housing construction. And if you go downtown Madison, that's basically all those condos that are being built, okay? And a lot of that's being driven by Epic, okay? So the question is, why isn't the housing market rebounding to the level that it was before the Great Recession? And that's a question. I don't have an answer for that, but I think it's something that we need to be thinking about, okay? Now, housing stress. Is it the case that the housing that we have is just simply too expensive? So one of the things that we're interested in better understanding exactly how stressed are people when it comes to housing. And what we're using with this is this kind of 28-36 rule. And what this is, how many of you have bought a house? And the first thing the real estate agent asks you is, what's your budget? Right? And how do you determine what your budget is? Take your annual income, your gross income, multiply it by 3. That's the 30 rule, okay? So it's a kind of as a rule, we kind of use that. You shouldn't be spending more than 30% of your gross income on housing. If you're spending more than 30%, you're kind of entering that stressed territory. So this is using the census, the American Community Survey. It's a 5-year average. We haven't updated yet. It's on my list of things to do. Is the darker, this is the percent of housing where people are spending more than 35% of their income on housing. That would technically be your housing stress. You're spending too much money on housing, okay? The darker the color, the higher the percentage of people that are classified as housing stress. Now, if you look at kind of the northeast area and the west coast and Colorado and parts up here, down in Florida a little bit, you can see that there's high levels of housing stress. My daughter just moved out to Boston to go to graduate school. Oh my God, is it expensive? She has a 500 square foot efficiency apartment and she pays $2,300 a month for a 500-foot efficiency apartment. It's like, oh my God, how can people afford to live like that? I'm sure you've heard stories, horror stories of San Francisco and the cost of living in San Francisco. Okay, there's actually now, you're seeing a lot of Silicon Valley, which is right in that area right underneath there, is actually starting to move out of Silicon Valley. It's moving up into Portland, it's moving into other parts of the western US, and one of the big drivers is housing costs. It's just simply too expensive to operate in Silicon Valley anymore. They've been too successful. Okay? There's actually a recent study that just came out that is looking at economic growth in the Mountain West, and one of the things that's been going on for the last 30 years is that high amenity areas in the Mountain West has been seeing, particularly rural areas, has been seeing a lot of growth, okay? People are essentially moving into these high amenity areas. Now, if you look post the Great Recession, those high amenity areas are actually lagging behind non-high amenity areas. Well, what's happening here? It's housing costs. They've been so successful that housing prices have been driven up to such an extent that people can't afford to move into the area anymore unless you're really high income. So they've always been too successful. Now, how that affects southern Sauk County is that you're blessed with a lot of natural amenities. You have the river, you have the eagles, you have the Baraboo Bluffs. You have a lot of amenities that is very attractive to people. Now, the question is that if we're not seeing a lot of new housing being developed and people are moving in because they like these high amenities, are they driving housing prices up? Is it creating a housing stress situation, and that's affecting the economy in a negative way? Now, if you look at Wisconsin, Wisconsin is kind of, well, before I get to Wisconsin, why do you think the central part, there's no stress there? Because there's no amenities there. I mean, there's just, people don't really, I hope I don't offend anyone. Anyone from Iowa? well, just go with a grain of, well, you're not there anymore, you're here, right? That lack of amenities is really reflected in housing prices in that part of the U.S., okay? You can actually see Illinois is, again, experiencing some, well, all of Illinois is experiencing stress. But look at Wisconsin. Wisconsin isn't really, nearly as bad as the two coasts, but you're starting to see some issues related to housing stress in terms of people spending too much money on their, too much. So for example, if you use this 30-28-36 rule, if you have a gross monthly income of $5,000, the most that you should be spending on your house is what, about just over $1,200, okay? That's kind of the threshold that we're looking at, okay? Now, another way of looking at it is the ratio of median owner-occupied housing values to median household income. Again, if you want to use the 30 rule, you want to be in this blue shaded area. The darker the red, the higher the stress. You see the exact same kind of pattern here. Okay, you're starting to see a fair number of areas within Wisconsin that are starting to approach that kind of stress level. I think this is one of the reasons that housing is becoming a bit of an issue in Wisconsin. Now, if you look down in this kind of area, you would think, well, that's more a reflection of poverty and low income than it is. And the other thing, you can kind of pick out some of the Native American reservations. Now, renters. That's home ownership. That's if you own your home. Now, what about renters? Renters, this is a much higher level. The darker areas, you're getting 40% or more of renters are spending more than 35% of their income on housing. Okay, that's a real stress. Now, the problem is that for lower income households, apartment buildings or rental is a more viable option than actually owning a home. So having an adequate stock of rental property is really kind of important for the economic mix. A lot of communities struggle with this. Wanakee right now is going through kind of a housing. They want to figure out what they want to be when they grow up relative to housing. And they're really struggling with the question of, do we want to be a wealthy suburb of Madison, or do we want to have, if you work in Wanakee, can you afford to live in Wanakee? And they're really struggling with that because it's a reflection of how they view themselves. Okay? Now, what about Sauk City, Prairie du Sac? I picked Baraboo, Dodgeville, and Middleton as comparisons here. This is a simple breakout of the percent that is owner-occupied versus rental. And you can see that in Prairie du Sac, it's actually a little bit higher share than the comparisons actually own their home here. Okay? This is about on the Wisconsin average, but there's a little bit of variation here, but not a whole lot. So actually, the home ownership rates for Sauk City and Prairie du Sac is actually a little bit higher than some of these other comparison places. Okay? Now, what is the actual housing costs for owner-occupied? And what this is showing, essentially, is that there's a handful of folks down here that are spending less than $300 a month. Okay, you can see then it moves up to less than $500 a month. You can see Sauk City kind of jumps up. There's a relatively high percentage of home owners that are actually paying less than $500 a month for their homes. It's a higher share here. Okay, when we come out here, we can actually see that for Prairie du Sac, we're starting to see a higher share than we might expect otherwise that are actually paying a little bit more. Now, I think this is a reflection of some of the quality of the new construction that's going on here. There's some new housing that's going on, and that new housing tends to be of a little bit higher end, and it's reflected in what people are paying in terms of that. Okay? This is rental. Notice that for housing, we're talking this kind of percentage range. Okay? Now, for rental properties, there's very few that are at this high end, okay? But the bulk of it's kind of falling into this range right in here, this kind of less than $800. Now, notice that Sauk City has a higher share there, and a relatively higher share there. But look at Prairie du Sac. Prairie du Sac actually has a high percentage that's in this higher category here. So a lot of the development that's occurring in Prairie du Sac is actually kind of that higher end. Now the question is that good, or is that creating a problem? Okay, from a pure economist perspective, the higher the quality, the better. Okay, but is it creating a housing shortage down at this lower end? Okay, that's a question that needs to be asked. Now, if you look at the median housing costs across here, you can see that actually, other than Middleton, right, Sauk City has the higher average median housing costs, and Prairie du Sac is a little bit higher, particularly on the renter-occupied. The renter-occupied is actually the highest of these 5 particular areas. Now, is that good, or is that a potential problem? Okay. Now, this is the share, the breakdown of owner-occupied that are paying more than 30% of their gross income on housing. Okay. So if you have household income of less than $20,000 in Prairie du Sac, no, actually there's nobody in Sauk City, that's a 0 there, okay? You can actually see in Baraboo, there's a fairly high percent, 8%, of households that are making less than $20,000 paying more than 30% of their income. Now, again, look at Prairie du Sac. There's a spike here in this income category of $50,000 to $75,000 that are actually, you know, that's a high number that are fairly stressed in that income category. Now, if you come down to Sauk City, you can see that at the higher income level, there's a little bit higher levels of stress. Now, the question is that this is about on par with the state average. Okay? Now, if you're comparing this to, say, California, we look great. You compare this to Boston, we look great. Okay? Rental, though, again, notice the scaling here, you know, up to 10, about 11. But if we go to rental property, we're looking at a much higher percentage, okay? Particularly for Prairie du Sac in these higher income levels, okay? Essentially, when we get into the renters market, if you're looking at the homeowners market, there's really kind of not that much high level of stress. There's a difference between Sauk City and Prairie du Sac. But when we get into the rental market, there's a growing concern that there's a bit of stress here. Now, the question is that should we be thinking about developing more affordable rental units? Is that something that we should be thinking about? Because if we have more affordable rental units, we might be able to attract more people to live in the area and then be available for work. Okay? This is kind of convoluted. This is Prairie du Sac. This is the distribution of household income. So, for example, 22% have household income between $100,000 and $150,000. This is the cumulative percent, so this is just simply 94% of the people have less than $150,000 worth of income. This is the estimated using the 30% rule. This is the maximum amount of annual housing costs. So if you're making between $150,000 and $200,000, you should be spending no more than $60,000 a year on housing, okay? Now, if you look at kind of where the average is, and you compare it to where this distribution is, we're actually finding that in Sauk City, we're actually not, or Prairie du Sac, we're actually not doing quite that bad, okay? Now, one of the things I want you to think about, because this is something that Waunakee, it struck me, is that we were doing a workshop, and I asked people, how much do you think, is $15 an hour a good paying job? How many of you think $15 an hour is a good paying job? Oh, good, because it's not. Because at $15 an hour, at 30% rule, the most you can pay for your housing is $750. That really eliminates a lot of housing opportunities for folks that are making $15 an hour. Now, if we do the same thing for Sauk City, we actually find that we're doing just a little bit better in Sauk City. Okay? Now the question is, if we think about affordable housing, we really have to think about, well, what kind of income level are we talking about? And that's what Wanakee is worrying about. What kind of folks do we want to live in Wanakee? And that's going to dictate the type of housing that they want to promote. Okay? Now, the future of the economy. Where is the economy look like it's going to go? I want to go through a couple of things here. Is the coincidence index, the leading economic indicators. One of the things that some folks are saying is this, the stock market. What's been happening in the stock market over the last several months? Boom, 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 boom. Right? I don't like to look at my supplemental retirement fund because before it started doing that, I thought, oh man, I can retire early. Now I looked at it and I said, oh, I don't want to look at it again. Okay? And then again, the Wall Street Journal survey of economists. Okay? Now, leading indicators. One of the things that economists look at on a fairly regular basis is the set of leading indicators. There's certain metrics in the economy that they're kind of like, if the manufacturing sector starts to slow down a little bit, that's an indicator that we might be going into a slowdown for the economy. If we see construction kind of take a bit of a dive, we know that we're kind of heading into a recession. So there's a set of leading indicators out there that are generally used. Now, this is something that is put together by the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. And what they look at is this coincidence of leading indicators and some other things. What's happening to housing permits? Okay? Is housing permits picking up or slowing down? Now, that's why when we look back and looked at the building permits post the Great Recession, that's a cause for concern because that's basically saying the economy is not responding the way it should be. But every other indicator is saying we're doing okay. So what's happening to the housing market? Did everybody hear that? Even if contractors wanted to build new housing, they can't find the labor to actually do the construction work. That's a very real possibility. And if there's anybody that's in the construction trade here, I'd love to talk to you if that's really what's happening, if that's playing out. But that's a real possibility. We're going to have a whole side conversation of why is the number of young people going into the trades declining. Okay? I'm trying to convince my son that he ought to shift jobs and become a long-haul trucker because he can make as much money as I do. Actually, he can make more money than I do, being a long-haul trucker. But why aren't people going into that industry? Yes. Go to college. You need to have a college degree. Do you have to have a college degree to be successful? No, you don't. It helps, but you don't have to. I think I've used before the example of my sister who barely made it through high school, but she runs her own business and she's extremely successful. She just came back from 2 weeks in Jamaica staying at a 5-star hotel. Right when we were in that cold blast, she kept texting me pictures of her on the beach, and I said, stop it. She just smiled and sent more. Okay. State initial unemployment insurance claims. This is an indicator put out by the Institute for Supply Management. Basically, how are manufacturers doing with their input supplies? And then this one is really interesting. It's looking at the spread between 10-year Treasury bonds and 3-month Treasury bills. It's the yield spread. I want to come back to this one because I think that one's really kind of interesting. Okay? So these are, now the coincidence index. This is something that looks at 4 indicators: non-farm payroll employment, the unemployment rate, average hours worked in manufacturing, and wages and salaries. And you can see how Wisconsin is doing relative to the U.S. You can see the Great Recession, and you can see Wisconsin recovering. Now, one of the reasons that, well, one is the frustration is that Wisconsin's recovery was much slower than the rest of the U.S., but part of this is also being driven by the unemployment rate and average hours worked in manufacturing, okay? As there's a labor shortage and manufacturers are thinking of shifting over to more automation, they're trying to get their workers to work a few more hours, okay? And we're seeing some indication of that. We're not seeing a lot of that, but we're seeing enough to help explain why this is moving upwards. Okay? Now, the yield spread. This one is really interesting. What this is doing is essentially comparing short-term interest rates and long-term interest rates. Okay? You would think that the interest rate is really composed of three parts. One is, well, not the Fed's, this is the federal interest rates. But the interest rate is composed of three things. One is the normal rate of return. I mean, the banks have got to make a profit, right? I mean, we do live in a capitalist society. They have to make a reasonable profit. They have to estimate, what is your risk of defaulting? That's where your credit rating comes in. I'm trying to explain to my son that he needs to work on his credit rating, okay? And the third thing is, what do we think inflation is going to be, okay? Now, longer-term loans, that rate of default and that rate of inflation tends to be higher than short-term. So we would expect short-term interest rates to always be lower than long-term interest rates, okay? Now, the yield spread is essentially the ratio of those two things, okay? And you'll notice that most of the time, the long-term interest rates are higher than the short-term interest rates. But notice that occasionally, it drops below. What happens almost exactly 1 year after that ratio, short-term interest rates become higher than long-term interest rates? Almost like clockwork, there's a recession. There's one recession. There's one recession. Not quite, got close, recession, recession, recession. Okay? This is the one indicator that really works pretty well. Now, this is one thing that has a lot of economists fairly worried, is that what's happening to it right now? It's getting really low. The concern here is that if this thing flips negative, if historical patterns hold, that means we're going to go into a recession. Okay? Here is another way of looking at that. It's a little bit cleaner. This is what's got a lot of folks really worried. If this thing drops negative, that's a strong indicator that we're going to go into a recession. Okay? Now, here's the leading indicators. Okay? You can see the recessions popping in, and you can notice that the leading indicators are actually fairly stable. Okay, you see a little ups and downs and ups and downs. One of the reasons that I think that the Wisconsin is a little bit more unstable than the U.S. is because of the manufacturing dependency of the U.S. But right now, it looks as though, we're not doing that bad. Okay, if you believe these, then it doesn't look like we're going to be going into a recession in the next 6 months, which is good. Now, this really looks like I debated about including this, but this is the U.S. and comparison states. One thing I want to point out here is look at Michigan. Michigan is jumping all over the place. Now, why is Michigan jumping all over the place? Manufacturing, automotive manufacturing. Okay, Michigan is highly dependent on the auto industry and manufacturing. Are they over-dependent on manufacturing in the auto industry? According to this, yes, they are. Now, this means something in terms of how we promote economic development. One of the things that Wisconsin has a proud tradition in is manufacturing. Okay? But if we promote too much manufacturing development in the state, are we kind of opening ourselves up for greater instability? If we look at Michigan, we are opening ourselves up for more instability. So one thing that we need to think about is really kind of having a more diversified economic base to kind of minimize these wild swings. Okay? The stock market. Is the stock market a predictor of the future economic activity? Historically, you would think it is, but most of the research is saying it's disconnected. There really is a very, very weak link between what's happening to the stock market and what's happening to the overall economy. Okay? And you also notice that from 1960 up until the mid-1990s, right, this is the percent change, right, from month to month. And notice how stable it is. all of a sudden the stock market has really gotten to be very unstable. Lots of fluctuations in the stock market. How many of you look at the stock market every day? End of the day. Does it drive you nuts? Not anymore? Got used to it? The only time, you have to look at the percent change, okay? You have to look at the percent change in the stock market from day to day. If it's, whoops, well, it's just more current data. That's essentially, this next chart is essentially looking at this time period. I'm taking that up, Jesus, stop hitting the button, okay? Generally, if it's more than a 1% change, then it's a significant change. If it's less than a 1% change, it's really not a change, okay? The other thing is that you want to look for continuous trends. Now, the economists usually say 3 data points make a trend, but with the stock market, it's going to be more like a week indicates a trend. But we've had periods in the stock market where, we've had, a lot of down, and then it turns around and bounces right back up. So that connection between the stock market as an indicator of what's happening to the economy has kind of fallen apart. Okay? Now, the Wall Street Journal forecast. Again, what the Wall Street Journal does is that they do a monthly survey of about 70 different economic forecasting institutions. These can be academics, the big banks, some think tanks do economic forecasts. Okay? And what they do is they survey that. And what I want to do is I want to share the results of some of that survey forecast. Now, what are the big things? The bottom line is less growth over the next year, more uncertainty. What do we mean by uncertainty? Certainty is we know for a fact that something is happening. You have a signed contract, right? You got a business loan, you got a signed contract, you know what's in that contract. You can make plans based on that. Risk is we're not sure exactly what's happening, but we can make a really good educated guess. And that's what economists spend a lot of their time trying to do, is to make those educated guesses. Okay? Uncertainty is we don't know what's going on and we can't make an educated guess. Now, the concern here with the Wall Street Journal is that a lot of the trade policies that are going on right now, we're really not sure what's going on. What was in the news this morning and yesterday about trade policy? What is the president thinking of doing? 25% tariff on all German automobiles. What do you think that's going to do to the sale of German cars in the U.S.? It's going to kill it. What's that going to do to Germany?
Kick them off.
And hit them really hard. Germany's the biggest economy in Europe, so what does that mean for the European economy?
They're going to come back swinging. They're going to do the same thing to us.
There's a rumor that this is a rumor, so you got to take it as a rumor, is that BMW's made major investments in South Carolina. They're thinking of maybe slowing that down. Now, is that a retaliation? Yeah, probably. But it's creating a tremendous amount of uncertainty. What's happened to the trade policy that's really impacted a lot of agriculture? Not so much Wisconsin agriculture, but, say, the Corn Belt.
Shape the overseas trade routes. I think the biggest thing is it's reshaped the overseas trade routes where the grains are going now. It's totally shifted it.
It's shifting it all around, right? China was one of our biggest buyers of soybeans. China basically said, we're not going to buy your soybeans anymore. What happened to the price of soybeans? Crashed, okay? This kind of trade stuff has ramifications, has significant ramifications. And what we're doing with those trade policies is really, we don't know. We don't know, okay? Now, what I've done for you here is I've taken an average of the forecast for the growth rate for gross domestic product. This is kind of our granddaddy measure of the economy. That's the average forecast for the fourth quarter of 2018. That data hasn't been released yet, okay? I took the average and then I computed the standard deviation, and I added one standard deviation to get kind of the high range and subtracted the standard deviation to get a low range. Now, what's the trend here? The trend here is that the economy is going to continue to grow, but it's going to slow down. Okay? Remember the yield spread? That's driving a lot of this conversation. Okay? We're going to slow down. Now, we're still trying to figure out what the shutdown, the federal government shutdown, what the implications of that was on the economy. How did that affect the banking industry, Steve? Did it affect you guys at all?
I haven't seen any data specific to our industry if it impacted the economy.
Okay, but did you see like any loan applications that kind of got put on hold because?
I don't think we noticed it in our little shop.
In your shop, no? There's been a lot of concern in the banking industry, or in the farm industry, that because USDA got shut down, a lot of farmers rely on USDA loan guarantees. And with the federal government shutdown, all those got backlogged. So you had a lot of farmers that are right now having serious cash flow problems. And anything that was, preventing them from negotiating, lines of credit or anything, it was a real kind of, it created a lot of uncertainty in the ag industry because USDA was shut down. Okay, so that's a question mark. Okay. Now, let's go out a little bit farther. Again, we're forecasting out to the year 2020 that the growth rate is going to slow down. Now, one of the things that you have to realize with economic forecasts is that we can be pretty good at forecasting straight lines. Okay? We can do a pretty good job if we think the economy is going to slow down or the economy is going to speed up. What we really have a very difficult time doing is forecasting when it flips, when it starts to go into a recession, okay? So if you're growing and then all of a sudden you dip down like that dip down, we have a very hard time forecasting that. That's why that yield spread is so interesting, because it's the one indicator that does seem to be able to predict that downturn, that flip, okay? What about the unemployment rate? Unemployment rate should be stable, but then it's going to start to go up. As the economy slows down, the unemployment rate's going to start to slowly tick up. Okay? Inflation's basically going to be flat. Okay, 2.2%. Okay? We're not expecting inflation to go up or be a problem in the near future. But again, with trade policy, you start to put tariffs on things, prices start to go up. That's a form of inflation. Okay? Whoa, what's that? Why did that do that? It looks pretty. Can't read it, but it looks pretty. The federal funds rate. What the federal funds rate is that banks by law have to have a certain amount of cash on hand at the end of the day. What is it, 2%? No, it's not even 2%. It's less than 2%. It's like 0.5%. But it basically, banks have to have a certain amount of cash at the end of the day. Now, some banks will not meet that, and other banks will have more than enough cash on hand. So at the end of the day, what banks do is they loan back and forth to each other. Okay, so if I have more cash on hand at the end of the day than I need, I can loan it to a bank that has not enough cash to meet up. The Federal Reserve sets that interest rate. Okay? That interest rate is a real strong indicator of what the feds are going to do related to monetary policy, which drives interest rates. Okay? The forecast is that they're going to up it a little bit more, just a tiny little bit, and then they're basically going to keep it flat. Okay? So essentially the Federal Reserve is trying to put a little bit of a brakes on the economy by raising interest rates, but ever so slowly, and then they're just going to wait and see. Okay? Because if they raise interest rates too fast, what is that going to do to the economy? It's going to cause it to go into a tailspin. Okay? So they're very careful with how they do this. So we're forecasting, or not we, they are forecasting that interest rates are going to tick up just a little bit more and then stay flat. Okay? Forecast for 10-year notes, they're going to be trending upwards just a little bit. But notice how this, it's not really a confidence interval, but the range of the forecast. Notice that as we go farther and farther out in the future, that range gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's essentially saying the confidence interval as we go on in the future gets bigger and bigger. Okay? Our ability to forecast with accuracy, we can do 3 months, we can do 6 months, but when you get to a year, there's too much noise going on. Okay? Now, one thing that they ask, the Wall Street Journal asks, is what is the probability of going into a recession over the next 12 months? One person, one forecaster said there's a 60% probability of going into a recession. There's a couple people down here that said none. So we have a high of 60 and a low of none. There's one person down here that said we have a 0% probability of going into recession. What's the average? About 1 in 4 economists are saying we could go into a recession this coming year. And a lot of what's driving that is looking at that yield spread. Okay? That yield spread is going to cause us problems. The other thing is the uncertainty over trade policy. We're not sure what's going to happen. Okay? So, the larger Sauk economy is growing, but at a very modest rate. Okay? It's not growing nearly as fast as it did before the Great Recession. Is housing becoming an issue in economic growth and development for the region? Okay? Is there a problem with a housing shortage? Is that creating stress in the housing market? And if I'm spending so much money on housing, I don't have money to spend on other things. Okay? So it creates kind of a bottleneck for the economy. Is that an issue for the area? The larger national economy will be slowing down. A recession within the next year is unlikely. A recession a year from now, perhaps. And I will stop with that. Questions?
See a highly stressed housing area, people curbing spending, or they continue to spend and borrow?
I think they're continuing to spend and borrow. There's one statistic that came out that is an alarming number of people are more than 3 months delinquent on their car payments. So I'm worried that people are maybe taking on too much debt, but it's a flip. Interest rates are so low, it's almost like, I can afford that little bit more expensive car because the interest rates are so low. And if interest rates start to tick up, then debt's, particularly if you're on an adjustable rate. Are any of you on an adjustable rate? Fix it. Lock it in. Because that creates a lot of uncertainty in terms of what's happening. So I think that there's some indication that maybe it is starting to go up a little bit. But the one thing that we're going to start looking at now is student debt. Student debt is going through the rough. And there's some indications that student debt is actually creating a bottleneck in the economy because if you've, it's the old Blues Brothers, so how can you save any money when you're 30 years in debt? Well, with student debts now, a lot of students are graduating. They can't afford to buy a car. They can't afford to buy a house. Lord knows they can't start a business because they have too much student debt. And that's something that we're starting to look at now. Other questions? With Foxconn? Yes. Oh, how long have you got? Foxconn never made sense to begin with. There's a reason why commercial electronics is not manufactured in the U.S. Is because we simply don't have a cost advantage. It's just too expensive to manufacture that kind of stuff in the U.S. It's just cheaper to do it overseas. Why Foxconn wanted to locate a manufacturing plant in the U.S. just never made any economic sense at all. I would be willing to bet a lunch at Culver's that 2 years from now, Foxconn is not built. Because I just don't think it never made economic sense. Now, they do say that they want to invest in research and development here, and I think that that has a potential payoff. I was talking to somebody who does solar panel insulation, and he's really worried because the cost of solar panels is going up. And he kind of made the argument that it's the solar industry, the U.S. has a comparative advantage in terms of designing new ways of doing it, designing new systems, coming up with innovations in the solar industry. But once those innovations are developed and those designs are made, it's cost effective to ship it overseas and have it manufactured and then bring it back. Because if we manufactured it here, it'd be too expensive. People wouldn't buy it. Okay? You're seeing the same thing with other types of electronics, is that it makes sense to have it designed and built, and the research and development done here and then have it manufactured someplace else. Okay? That's what Apple does. I mean, no Apple products are made in the U.S., but they're all designed here, they're all beta tested here, and all the design specifications are done here. And then we ship it overseas to have it made. And I think that's kind of the future way where we're going. Now, manufacturing really is, you've got to think about it in terms of a commodity versus a product. A commodity is, I mean, perfectly honest with you, that's a commodity, right? I'm just going to go to the store that I can buy the cheapest at, okay? A product, on the other hand, is something that I'm willing to pay a premium for, okay? Custom manufacturing, small batch, custom manufacturing. We have a comparative advantage in that area, but large-scale commodity manufacturing, we don't have that comparative advantage anymore. So manufacturing, I think, is moving in a different direction. Smaller scale, custom manufacturing.
How does automation affect that if it's going to lower the labor need but increase the specialty needed
Exactly.
to monitor that? So if
Exactly. You want a custom valve made and you need 500 of them, I could do it like that. Okay? A Chinese manufacturer is not going to deal with that. Okay? So it's that smaller scale custom. And we're going to be moving more and more towards automation. So the skill set that is required in manufacturing is going to be moving up a scale.
So wouldn't that imply that there's less offshoring of that manufacturing because we have the automation and we're innovating that? So it's going to bring it back home?
Could be, but not the same number of jobs. Not the same number of jobs, and different jobs.
Thank you, Dr. Deller.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Swana German, and I work with the Sauk-Prairie Chamber. And I would like to, first and foremost, thank Steve, Roxy, and all the staff, Lauren Indris or not Olson now, for coordinating today and being a sponsor of this event. Dr. Deller's remarks are always spot on, helps us really plan and direct for the future here in our community. So we appreciate you battling the weather coming out. We will have more question and answer opportunity at the end of this, but we're going to continue on now with local updates. And so again, I work with the Chamber, and I have the pleasure each year of working with local municipal and school administrators on various projects. And today you're going to hear about those projects, some good news items that occurred over the past year, and then projects that are just starting or will be opening this year. Let me get my clicker. I love data because I think it's the only real way that you can measure success and help drive ideas and recommendations. And so if you attended this event last year, you know that the Chamber spent all of 2016-17 doing a market analysis for our community. But I thought I would start this morning just to kind of give you a high-level overview of local business. From where I'm sitting and all of the data that we measure, local business was very strong over this past year. And while everyone was looking for employees and really struggling with how to recruit and retain, in terms of engagement and the feel of businesses, that was very successful. And so I think we had 37 new members last year. In January of 2019, we've already had 7 new members come into the chamber and join. And so things seem to be going very well. One of the things I do, it's not enough to host 50, 60 events every year, but out of those 330 members, are people engaged? And is it not just the business owner, but their employees? And I'm proud to say locally that over last year, 70% of all of our members were actively engaged coming to various events in the community. So just a quick highlight there. Some of our new branding that you're going to see, Experience Sauk-Prairie, and that's a fun campaign that we've just launched. But if you attended last year, we shared with you those market analysis results. And so we spent a lot of time interviewing local business, but also interviewing your employees. And we really looked at the demographics. We spent time working with high school students, college-age students, those who grew up in Sauk-Prairie and decided to move and work elsewhere, and then really tried to nail down what would it take to get you back. We interviewed those who live somewhere else and drive into our community each day, and really tried to understand what would make you choose to purchase a home or rent a home here to live. And so some of the things after doing those roundtables, our conclusions and recommendations were we really need to continue to find ways to strengthen our business, but we also need to get a handle on what can we do to attract more employees. And so again, if you go back to the data points, about 3,000 people drive into our community each day, and they live somewhere else. And that's really important for you when you're thinking about retaining those workers, because we know if we can get them to choose to live here, to buy a home, to be engaged in our community and work here, they're less likely to leave. But about 3,000 of our existing residents get in their car and leave the community every day. So trying to understand strategies, what makes working in areas to the north or the west more attractive, and what could we offer locally to try to get some of those people to choose to stay and work in Sauk-Prairie. Then we look at comparison communities and try to understand that. And one of the things that your employees kept telling us, and those that are living elsewhere, is your community has priced us out of the market. So I never know what Dr. Deller is going to present in terms of numbers, but I was sitting down here going, home run today, because you certainly had a presentation that leads into what our local administrators are going to share. So at this time, I have a board member of the chamber, Dave Johnson. He also works locally with First Weber Group, and he serves on our Economic Development Committee. He is going to come up and talk with you about some of our findings locally about housing, and this is what your employees told us. So, Dave?
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for braving the weather to come out. I used to be one of the people that drove into town here, and then I have a life change and moved, and one of the things that was striking to me, and it still is true today, is that my rent when I moved to town was higher than my mortgage in the previous place where I lived. And that's certainly something that's a trend that we're continuing to see. The rental market in Sauk-Prairie, if any of you have been looking or have been talking with folks who have been looking, it's tight. 100% occupancy with 4 to 5 month waiting lists. Average costs are in that $1,100 to $1,200 per month for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. And higher for that the larger you get, and then you get into the single family home market and you've got, you know, $1,400 plus per month. It's a pretty penny to not see an investment coming back over the long term as you would have if you were purchasing a property. Folks are saying, what would we like for, you know, the ideal rental position for us to come into town? 2 and 3 bedroom apartments with garages. Particularly the garage is going to hit home with the winter we've had the last month. They'd like to have them be pet-friendly. Multi-unit housing would need to have amenities like underground parking, pool, workout center, social area for people to share and gather. Standalone duplexes are certainly more desirable than the larger complex components of rental housing that we're seeing. And options for empty nesters going into retirement, and we'll hit again on that as we go forward through the slide deck. What does the average buyer want? Kind of the same thing. 3-bedroom, two bath, 2-car, in town somewhere, municipal services for $200,000 to $250,000. Here's the reality, and these are our numbers, sold numbers in Sauk County, in the Sauk-Prairie School District, and then the South Central Wisconsin MLS over the last 3-year period. And if you'll see the trend, the median pricing and how that has changed. So from 16 to 17, the median price of a home in Sauk-Prairie School District went up almost 12%. It slowed a little bit last year, and I think that we saw that certainly in our engagements with folks as they were looking for things. There was a growth, again, in the county, and a growth as a median number in the South Central Wisconsin MLS as well, but not to the same increments that we're seeing here in the school district. And then the things that really jumped out, this is the pricing component and how much higher we were for a median price compared to South Central. That's including Madison and Dane County. But the county here, median price of a home in our school district, $255, median price in Sauk County, $189. So exactly fitting in with what Dr. Dale was talking about in the front end of the presentation. What would affordable workforce housing look like? Contemporary housing based on good design, minimal impact, some of those things that we talked about, having amenities, affordability, being able to mix things in the different residential environments, having mixed use, single family, multifamily, et cetera. And then the other thing that we're seeing is that people are looking for things that are in closer proximity. They can walk. You don't have to drive miles and miles to get to the grocery store, to get to the parks, to get to schools, to get to recreation areas, those kinds of things. And we can also look at housing that can be rehabilitated from existing housing and improved upon. Who needs workforce housing? Renters with lower incomes. We talked about, the things that people were under stress. That's definitely something that we're seeing, and other folks are going to share their experiences with their workforce living outside of the area, driving in. Here we've got something that talks about affordable rent using the ratios discussed earlier and wages by occupation. Final thoughts. So a couple things that came to mind during the front end of the presentation. Obviously, land is at a prime with the river being on one side of the community, and the need to expand sort of being driven by availability in terms of land that's available and developers having the capital to be able to go out and do things. That's certainly one thing. Building costs, very prohibitive. When we had this conversation last spring, I think average build was $175 a square foot. And that contract was being honored for about 2 weeks. So materials costs, natural disaster, earthquake, fire, shortage of labor supply, definitely driving up building expense. And inventory is also definitely a huge issue. So the benefits of attracting, some developing workforce housing for the market, rising tide kind of lifts all ships, and as people continue to age in place, stay in their homes longer, home health becomes more of a common delivery system for people. Those types of jobs are going to continue to need to be offered here for people to be able to stay in this community, but as it becomes more and more challenging for people to be able to afford to live in the community, that's when you start to have a problem. You're going to have that out-migration of people. They can't find the services, so they're going to go somewhere else where it exists. So if your housing economy is not healthy, then the challenges that you run up against. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dave. Next, and again, we want you to see the data listen to what's being presented, but start making questions and comments, because this is really going to be all of us working together and finding solutions together. Next, we have Village President Jim Anderson with the Village of Sauk City to share some of their items.
Good morning, everybody, and I thank you for this opportunity. I've been village president for about 16 years, 2 more coming up with this next election. One of the things that we found that we were hurting with, we didn't have the right people in place, but we were looking for a change maker, and once Tawana German came on board, she certainly got things rolling in the community, and since then we've been pretty successful at doing a lot of the things that we kind of projected to do. So we're very appreciative of Tawana and all the work that she does for us. So let's give her a big hand. So in 2018, we've had 11 new businesses. It's not easy to bring businesses in town, but we have the Body Shop of Sauk-Prairie, Lammers Bus Lines, Time for You Healing Center, John Joseph Coffee, Village Pub, Just for Kids Resale Shop, Herb RX, Nails for Marlowe, Remax Grand, Tools of Marketing, and the Vintage Brewing Company. They've all been good neighbors and easy to work with in it, and they bring a little more diversity into the community and offer a little bit more. The problem that we have is with the big boxes on both sides of the communities in Baraboo and Madison, we can't really compete with the big box stuff. So these unique businesses are very nice to have along. And we talked about the housing market. One of the biggest problems we have in Sauk City is we're landlocked. We don't have a lot of opportunity. So one of the things we did is we purchased the school from Spruce Street School from the school district, and we have, I believe, 23 possibilities of housing there. And then we have Fox Run that's going to be doing their 17 houses and stuff like that. And as you see the slide up here, this is probably one of the biggest things that we have going right now. I think it's like a $2.1 million renovation of August Earlith Park, which will eventually be Sauk City Riverside Park. And then anybody here that has any extra money, we have some of these I don't know what you call them. Yeah, amenities that are for sale. You can sponsor one. Just go to the Village of Sauk City and talk with Heidi, and she'll get it. But we're going to be doing a top-of-the-line park down here as part of the Great Sauk Trail, which is another amenity that came into town that hopefully will be a destination place. And there's a couple other places we're working on right now. We're going to look at the village. So those are the 2 developments we have going right there. But we're looking at some other possible developments in the community, redevelopment projects. One of them that we did was like the old creamery and stuff like that. So the Riverside Park is starting sometime, hopefully. We just got done doing the bids, and we awarded two contractors the bids, one for the doing the concrete work that have done these kind of parks before and that. And so we're hoping that the late February we'll start doing some of the preparation. If you notice already, we have trees coming down and everything, and some of our guys are prepping that area for that particular thing. The projected date is Labor Day, it says here, but I think they said closer to the beginning of August, so we'll have some opportunity to use that. It'll also make the river a little more utilized because there'll be a handicap accessible place for them to go in. So with the new schoolyard addition, we have 23 residential lots in the Cardinal Estates, 20 right now. One of the initiatives I want to do real quick, too, is we have a shortage not only in labor and stuff like that, but we also have it. There's nobody following us elected people up. All of us old people are doing all this work. And so I'm working with the school, the chamber, and both communities to try to get some kind of liaison students from the high school here on planning commission, police commission, finance committee to try to get them interested in the community service type of stuff so we can bring some people in. We don't have a lot of people stepping up in the EMS or the fire. But I've just put Pam Shaw from the Bank of Prairie to Sac on the police commission, and I encouraged Abigail Struns to run for village board, and they're both in their 20s and stuff like that. So the idea is to try to get as many of these young people interested from the high school level into the village government so they can take over for us old people so we can retire. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Next, we have Alan Wildman, Village Administrator with the Village of Prairie du Sac.
Good morning. I always look forward to this because Dr. Eller, I have to, your presentation is always great. And like Tawana said, what you had today is just perfect. I mean, just as Wanakee is going through their discussions, we are too. Housing, as we have been beaten on it is an important issue right now that our community is facing. So the Village of Prairie du Sac, right now we have the 5th and final phase of West Wind. It's actually called the West addition to West Wind. That is available now. They've got the 33 lots so far. 6 of those lots have been already sold and houses already built there. So last year in 2018, the village saw 11 new single-family homes go up and 1 new duplex go up with a total value of $3.5 million. Although we saw 138 building permits with a total value of $7.1 million for 2018. Of that, one new commercial building at $1.2 million. So there's still some growth there. Our building permit numbers are somewhat down the last couple of years from where they have been, but there's still some steady though. So. We've also retired a TIF district early in 2018. Actually, in the last couple of years, we've retired some TIF districts early. We also created some new TIF districts. We have another TIF district number 4, that we expect to close it early too in the next few years. So our TIF districts are doing very, very well, and we're pleased with them and using them as an economic tool. So one of the things that we're working on is we talk about housing, and you made your point with Iowa and what's there, as amenities. It's one thing to have the houses and that there's something that you got to have here. Jim talked about the improvements they're doing down at the August Derleth Park to go along with the river, the Great Sauk State Trail and that. But we're also doing something too, a little bit a smaller project than what they are doing, but also something along the river and with the Great Sauk Trail. And so why are we doing that? So here's a list of reasonings. I could sit here and read through all of them. You can read them, but I can also provide them to you later. But there's a lot of things that we're looking at the downtown Water Street parking lot, redoing it, the Eagle Overlook, doing a little park area that's down below that's next to the river, right on the trail. The trail will go right through it. The original plan for the Great Sauk Trail was for that area to be a portal for the trail to get people to go in the downtown and also from downtown to the trail and that as well. So the plan for this is to celebrate all of that, celebrate downtown, the trail, the river, and also the transportation history of that area, not just from what was on the river, what's on the highway, but also the rail that came through there. So. There's problems down there too. So not only does it develop something new, but it's going to take care of some problems. These retaining walls that you see there, that stuff came from Badger ordinance. There's all kinds of concrete down there that whenever they did a new project at Badger, they get rid of the concrete and curbing and stuff. Hey, we'll take it. It's free. We'll use it. Back in the day, that's what we did. So there's things like that. There's vegetation problems down there. There's washing. There's crumbling infrastructure. So that's all part of this project too. So here's the big picture of it. Of course, you can see the parking lot, the river, the area that's along the river there. We're looking at a platform to get people out so they can maybe see up and down the river a little bit better than what you can now. I just keep stepping on a little thing here. So here's a little zooming in, the parking lot. One of the things here, we're going to improve pedestrian safety by this. Right now, the parking lot, I forget which button is the pointer. Oh, there it is. So right now, the parking lot has an entry here, and then it's one way here, and you come out right here. So what's happening is then that's competing with the people that are coming from businesses over here, like the dental office, to the parking lot. So they got to cross that traffic entrance. Same thing, people leaving the Blue Spoon or the library or the movie theater going to the parking lot, they're walking across here, you know, and it's not, if you've ever used that parking lot and you've tried to leave that parking lot, the visibility is terrible. So what we're proposing to do with this project is move those entrance and exits to the intersection here with the street. Somewhere where you more expect to have traffic coming and going, so. We're also looking at making major improvements here to the Eagle Overlook. One of the things when we talk with the Eagle folks is, you know, what's some things you want to see improve there? Well, when's Eagle season? It's in the right now. It's in the season right now. So they're out there standing on this platform out there in the wintertime. It's concrete. That cold is just going right through them from that concrete. So we're going to be putting in some decking there to get them off that concrete floor to just make a little bit easier for their volunteers when they're standing there greeting people from other communities and that into our area. So let's zooming in on that. And then this is our mid-level area. So this is where those bad retaining walls are at. We're going to redo this. There's a scary dark stairway that gets people down there. So redoing that, making it wider, bigger. Putting a place in here with some places where we can do some yard games, which will make sense on maybe the next slide here a little bit. So here's some ideas we had there, bigger staircase and a little entryway. So down below, we're talking about a little performance area here. Places where like the library can take the story hour, get the kids outside down, you know, in the outside area and do that. River Arts can bring over and do their small performances there. We have places where the idea here is these being seating that's there, but it's not really seats. It's going to be kind of like stones, limestone, and that people would sit on or bring their own chairs with them to sit there. The idea is you can see a little bit of that green area where the yard games was. How many times have you been there with to outdoor performance with your little kids and they watch the first song and then they're ready to like move. So the idea is that dad or mom can take the kids up here, play the yard games, and still be able to see the performance and be close to the action as well. And then we also have these little, nature walks here. So, believe it or not, when you ride a bike, sometimes you do want to get off the bike and maybe walk a little bit and get back on. So little areas that they can walk and get them down close to the water and stuff and take a break. There's also other amenities that will be going down in here for bikers too. Some are already installed. So here's some of the ideas we had. We also had an area for like a food truck or a food cart to be down there during the performances. Here's kind of examples of the stone work that would be there for seating and that. Then we're looking at ways to when I talked about celebrating the rail and other transportation modes, we actually have some of the rail line rails left that we were able to get a hold of that we're looking at trying to incorporate some kind of, maybe something like this that the kids can play on, to kind of celebrate that heritage. And then there's an example of that little place going out over onto the river. The nature walk area down there. So there is a phase 2 to this. Phase 2 is, when we did the planning, we made sure that we incorporated the future addition to the Ruth Culver Community Library so that whatever we did on the phase 1 would not be disturbed or as disturbed when the library expands. One of the things that we're also talking about, because when the library goes in, that little ramp area goes away, that little driveway that goes down there. So how are you going to get your bikes down there and back and forth? We're showing an elevator that would be incorporated with the library in phase 2. That would be big enough that you could put your bike in there and be able to take it up and down. They've got some of those in the Madison area. I think Monona Terrace, I think, has something like that. So that would be to keep that, being able to go back and forth from the areas. So again, I show you this because, we have to have the amenities here too to make our community to be attractive for the folks. Just as the Great Sauk Trail is one of those amenities, there's other things too that folks are looking at. Having opportunities for people to come together as a community for a small performance or that is crucial. So the cost of the project, about $1 million. But keep in mind, this is also taking care of some infrastructure needs that are down there that had to be done anyway. Of that, we've already received 2 different grants, a federal grant and also a state grant that in total takes care of about $359,000 of that cost. One of the new TIF districts has pledged about $268,000 to the project. And then we've also had some organizations that have pledged money towards the project also. So those costs are being brought down quite a bit. And that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, next we have Bob Geenan. He is the village administrator for the Village of Merrimack.
Why, thank you. And good morning, all. I've been with the Village of Merrimack just about a year. We haven't had a whole lot of new building or growth in the last few years. I think there's been 1 or 2 homes probably in the last 5 years. I expect about 2 or 3 homes to be built this year and probably 1 or 2 in 2020. So we're seeing a little bit of that bump. And I'd love to hear more about what the doctor thinks about that and how all this economic growth kind of works out. We've had a couple new businesses come into town. Amy Beth Photography takes pictures and also kind of makes a story out of it. She bought the old bank building right downtown in our business district. She does some really wonderful work. She kind of augments the photos, and then I've even seen some of it printed on like a metallic kind of finish. So they're kind of a neat industrial kind of look. CJ's Pub was bought out by Sean McLaughlin, who's going to open up and call it Max Pub and Grub, and he would like to expand it by offering some food. So he's working through with that right now. Also, we had a young lady move in that has a massage business, Woman in the Woods, and right now she's operating on her home. She would like to find a business in Merrimack itself, a storefront, so she's still working through that. One of the things we're finding too is there's kind of a big transition with TDS buying Merrimack Communications. It's a large property down there. That'll probably be something will be going on there in the next 1 to 3 years, I suspect. One of the things I'm very grateful for in this section of Wisconsin is TDS provides such high-speed internet. And we're really kind of blessed to have that because I think some of these millennials or the technological young industries might get sick of downtown Madison and might want to move into our smaller communities, and they'll have that ability with that high-speed internet. And just this last week, we had someone buy a home that used to be a restaurant years ago in our downtown area, and they want to put in a bed and breakfast. So we're getting some real possible growth. I think in the last 2 years, right there with the bed and breakfast, we're looking at 4 businesses moving into our downtown area. So I think there's some real hope for starting something to happen in the downtown of Merrimack. So, thank you.
All right, next we have Tim McCumber with the Town of Merrimack.
Thanks, Tawana. Good morning. First of all, there were a couple of things. I really appreciate what Bob says about the TDS and the high-speed internet up in our direction, because it's really awesome to go to Madison and you'll walk maybe through the mall or somebody, and somebody wants to sell you, 40 Mbps high-speed internet, and I'm like, no, dude, we're cruising past that already. So it's kind of nice that we're ahead of them in that range. We also kind of joke a little bit with this housing market study that we're alleviating all of the stress with the high-end homes. So they're coming out to the lakefront. To give you a good comparison, if you remember Alan's numbers, we had about 80 building permits last year, 16 of them in new homes with value just under $7 million. So it really rivals what we're seeing in Prairie District, except for the number is down. So it shows you those building permits are at a higher value. Some of you may read the news, and you'd be surprised to know we're getting some record revenue in room tax. And as a result of that and some changes in state law, we're required to spend that on tourism. So we've contracted with Tawana and the Chamber, and McCall and Stephanie and Tawana have been fantastic to work with. This is our new marketing campaign. We've revised our entire website. If you go look at it, I think it's a lot more user-friendly. It also kind of speaks to that tourism side of what's going on in town. We like to think of ourselves, because of the rural nature of our community, is really the playground, the backyard, so to speak. We have, and a lot of folks don't realize it, coming through Merrimack, 1 million visitors a year. So where do those 1 million visitors go? We don't want them to go to Baraboo. We want them to come this way. So this is kind of hopefully going to drive some of that. We have a new business, Lake Wisconsin Cruises. They did what I would call a soft season last year, trying to get familiar with what they're doing. They're ready to go hardcore. It's going to be really exciting. Rustic Ridge has new owners. If you've never had an opportunity to stay out there or stay locally, they're beautiful cabins right across from Devil's Head Resort. And they're really nice folks, great to work with. We also have new owners at the campground. Merrimack's campground is really a gem. It was highlighted in Midwest Living, real popular destination. You can go out there any day of the week during the summer, and it is constantly busy. H's Place, if you remember the old schoolhouse before it was the new old schoolhouse, Harry Hunt ran that place. Well, his daughter is now running H's Place out at Moon Valley, and they're offering pizza and different foods. They are packed all the time. We went into this Discover Wisconsin promotion with the Chamber. To demonstrate it works, they had a couple come in that drove, about 2.5, 3 hours, because they saw that special and sat down and ordered a pizza. Whole purpose of their trip. So, that's one story, and I think that's turning out to be a valuable endeavor. And then, of course, this is some of the marketing stuff we'll be featuring. We're trying to, like I said, show people what we have. And I think yesterday we posted out on, the Chamber posted, a new video that Discover Wisconsin had put, which was really kind of nice because it was unpromoted, but they used all the footage from the Merrimack shoot out at Riverland Conservancy. So when you're looking for outdoor activities and things to do, just a lot of stuff going on, and we're very proud of it, and I hope you guys like it and come out and check out some of our playground.
Great. Thank you, Tim. I would encourage you to go to the Town of Merrimack website. It's completely built, rebranded, and it's been a fun campaign to call it My Town and kind of experience the area. And so it's been a pleasure to work with you. At this time, if you were not at our annual dinner or haven't read local papers, you may not know we have the Sauk-Prairie Citizen of the Year with us, but he is also the Assistant Superintendent of Sauk-Prairie Schools. I give you Jeff Wright.
Thank you, Tawana. We are proud in the Sauk-Prairie School District that we might have a 5-day instructional week this week, the first one in 2019. So I'm glad that you're here and that we didn't have to cancel this morning or delay school. It's also the ACT that is happening today here at the high school for all of our juniors. So a nervous day here at the high school. I need you to get out a cell phone or some sort of electronic device, something that I never get to say in a school, or very rarely. And I'd like you to open up a web browser and go to this link to help us with our presentation. I knew I was last, so I'm trying to make mine interactive. If you don't have a device with you that is able to do this, if you can just look at somebody else and help them answer the questions. I'm going to be talking about income levels and salary levels and housing in the community from the perspective of the school district. And I want to just gauge our perspective as a community here based on hourly and some other salary information that I'm going to put up on a slide together. When you get there, it probably is telling you that I haven't started yet. You do not need to put your name in here. It's all anonymous. I'm not collecting this information. I have no idea what your guesses are. But hopefully it's telling you that you're getting to a survey, but it's not necessarily active yet. If you're struggling getting online or helping us out, Aaron Andrews, our assistant principal here at the high school, is right over there. He can help you. Tawana's done this with me already, and Chad Harnish, our high school principal, is on this side, so we can help you out too. So try to stay with me a little bit. I see that we've got 28 or so already underway, which means that it's at least working and our connections are good. So the first question that I ask is, what is the starting hourly wage for a Sauk-Prairie classroom assistant responsible for toileting or feeding or supporting students with unique needs? I'm just asking you to take a guess. What do you think our starting wage is for an employee, a teacher assistant or a classroom assistant responsible for supporting toileting, feeding, and students with unique needs? It looks like our number one guess is $12.33. I'm going to move on to the next question and then come back to this one because it's connected, and I don't want to give you the answer to this one until we have the next one. But the second question I asked then is, so after 15 years of experience in such a job, what would be the highest hourly wage that a classroom assistant responsible for toileting or supporting a student with unique needs would receive in our school district? Since they're connected, I'm going to go back to the first question. I'll answer this one, and then we'll go to the second question again because they're talking about the same type of employee here in our school district. And you are correct. The starting salary for an hourly employee helping students with unique needs is $12.33. I thought it was interesting earlier when asked by Dr. Deller if you thought $15 an hour was a good wage, that for this sort of job category, it seems that maybe we're not hitting that target. The question then that I asked next was, so after 15 years in the district, the highest hourly wage that you can get to do this work, you are also correct, is $16.01, which 38% of you guessed. So the next set of questions talk about our salaried employees who are full-time certified licensed teachers. And so I'm asking, what do you think the starting yearly salary for a full-time certified teacher is in Sauk-Prairie this school year? And again, I'm going to advance to the next question. If you'll go with me, and I'll go back to look at the answers in a second. Now I'm asking, what is the median salary of all Sauk-Prairie District certified full-time teachers? We have about 220 full-time certified teachers in the district supporting our almost 3,000 students. What is the median salary for those employees? So again, I'm jumping back to look at the first question about teaching staff, and then we'll go back to the question we just answered. The first question I asked was, what was a starting yearly salary? And you are correct. You're 3 for 3 as a full group. $40,241 is the starting salary for a full-time certified teacher in the Sauk-Prairie School District. And then I asked the question, so what is the median salary of all of our Sauk-Prairie School District teachers? And this is the first one where we did not have, as a group, the correct answer. Right now, our median salary is $50,416 for our teaching staff. So the second most popular, the 28% answer, some people are answering right now. You can put the right answer in now if you want to. Congratulations. If only the ACT happening next door were that easy. Then to connect this to some of the housing discussion that we've been having as a community and that we've been having as a school district, the Sauk County Housing Study, we saw parts of that information today that's been done by the Sauk County Development Corporation, lists the average rent for a Sauk-Prairie single-family home at $1,400 a month. According to that study, how much would you need to make per year to afford that rent? When I tested this out, it was with like 9 people, and so it was a lot less fun to see the bar graph change when we have more people in here now. You are correct. $56,000 is what the Sauk County Development Corporation says that you need to make as a household salary in order to afford the $1,400 a month average rent for a single-family home in our community. And this is something that as a school district we're struggling with because we would like our teachers to be able to live here. And I believe that that's something that the Sauk-Prairie community, if we were to ask people, would you want your teachers to be able to afford to live in the community? I think most of us would say yes. And that's part of the workforce housing we're discussing. But if I rewind a slide, our average or our median teacher income is $51,000. Our teachers make more than our support staff. And so if the median income for our teaching community is about $5,000 less than you need to make in order to afford the rent for a single-family home, when we welcome our new teachers to the district, we hear often how, I was hoping I could live here, but they're struggling to find a house. We have 3 of our 18 new teachers this year that were able to buy homes in the community. The 3rd just had an accepted offer 2 weeks ago. Very excited that they'll be able to move into the community, but most seem to be moving to either looking at Baraboo or Reedsburg or into the apartments near Middleton if you're going to be able to then drive into Sauk-Prairie, since affording a home in the community at a starting salary is difficult. The last question that I put on here, this is the current statistic. What percentage of Sauk-Prairie School District employees live in the geographical boundaries of the Sauk-Prairie School District? I'm going to guess that most of us have responded. It seems that 53% is the guess that is most popular. Right now, it actually is 63%. If you were to just look at the teaching staff, it is much closer to that 53% number. That our support staff often work here because they live here. That maybe they're on a family farm and one member of the family works in the school district in part to receive health insurance benefits for their family. But they choose to work in the Sauk-Prairie School District because they already live here. Teachers choose to work here even if it's more of I'm choosing to go to that destination to work. I looked at several different districts. I got hired in Sauk-Prairie. But it's more want to live here in the area than are able to. So when Tawana asked us to think about what we could present this year on the news of the school district, there obviously is constant news about what's happening in the schools. But this is the topic that she wanted us to bring, because employee compensation has been a constant conversation over the past few years. and trying to make sure that just like you, we can attract employees to the district that we want to have working here. The last few years, we've had a higher number of emergency certified teachers hired by the district than we've had in any of our memories. And that's because we haven't been able to get our first, second, or third choice candidates at times. So we've had to offer the job to someone who said that they could get an emergency license to do the job that we asked them to do. But part of that is because we're in a very competitive job market, just like you are, and our sister districts closer to Madison are paying at a much higher rate than we are. And so we're looking at compensation in the district, but we're also then asking this question, what can we do as a full community to address housing? I think when we think about workforce housing, and we use that term, or historically like using low-income housing or workforce housing, we don't always think about teachers. But teachers are in that formula that we're talking about when we bring up the idea of workforce housing and making sure that teachers who want to live here can live here in the future. That's some news from the Sauk-Prairie School District.
Thank you, Jeff. Stephanie, while I'm doing my closing remarks, can you pull up slide 2 of the overall presentation? Thank you, Jeff, for your remarks. I'm going to ask you to help me with questions and answers that we have, but I want to end this conversation here. When you think about a non-certified staff earning $12.41 an hour, capping out at $16.01 an hour, these are people that are serving our students, and serving students who 16 years old, 15 years old, can go down the street and get their first job with no experience, making more than the adult in the building who assigned them a hall pass or assisted them throughout the day. When you put that into perspective, it is just disheartening, to say the least. And I would encourage you to dig deeper in the state of our schools and their salary plan, because there's a rubric they use with squares and years of experience and degrees. When you go down that list and go across, it is appalling the amount of education, the number of years, and what that cap is. And I encourage you as a business community to really find solutions with the school district. On the slide that I asked, I'm sorry, the next slide, Stephanie. One more. The one with 3 dots talking about what people said they would live here. Keep going. Oh, back one more. We'll get there sooner or later. So in conclusion today, 65% of people that drive into this community every single day to work said we would consider living here. But in order for us to do so, this is what it has to look like. Around $1,000 a month in rent. You heard that we're at $1,200, $1,300, $1,400 average single family. If you remember Dr. Deller's slide, they can drive right past us and go to Baraboo, Reedsburg, and pay $750, $850 a month for those same things. We're talking a $300 to $500 per month difference. They want to pay around $250 or less, those people. You remember our median average cost, I believe, was $299,000 and growing almost double the rate of our counterparts. We don't have the solutions, we have the data, but we need business people, we need your ideas, we need residents to say, how do we get there? We need landowners to come forward and say, this is an emergency for our community. I wanted to say crisis, but I won't be dramatic. We're willing to work with you to divide some land, to make some land available. We need people that are interested in investing in opportunities to address the need for rental housing. He can't hire someone to come work here and ask them to live here when we have a 5-month waiting list and rents that they simply cannot afford. So I ask you to think about how you can be a part of finding solutions and reach out to any of the presenters that you've heard today. With that, we'll open it up to any questions you may have for any of the presenters, Dr. Deller or our area municipal or school leaders. Just raise your hand, we'll come to you with a microphone.
This is for Jeff Wright. Do you see any more money coming into the schools with Governor Evers?
The governor is supposed to release his budget on February 28th, and so we haven't seen the official budget. We are budgeting. We're developing a very conservative budget, just to be careful. But we have heard from both the legislature and the governor that more money will be coming into schools in this next cycle. We just don't know how much that's going to be. So we're cautiously optimistic that we will have a few more dollars next year to spend that we have in the last few.
Well, Dave Considine told me that a lot of the Republicans sounded like Democrats when they were campaigning, talking about more money into the schools. So it doesn't sound like it's going to...
I think that there is a lot of support for putting more money into public education in the state right now, and that is the safest answer that a previous failed candidate as a Democrat running for the state assembly can give you.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah. Any other questions?
This is a little different. Maybe to Tim, anything going on with Route 78? It looks like it's bouncing up and down again.
Highway 78 is a hot topic. We knew, and the DOT knew going in, that this was merely a patch. They were hoping that they could, their goal is that they're hoping to get about 5 years out of it. I think we all flipped quarters and thought they'd be lucky if they got 2. The problem with Highway 78 is that they use ground-up concrete from the Badger ammunition plant. Now, you know, the first thing DOT said, well, that shouldn't be the problem. We do that all the time. But consider that the Badger ammunition plant was put together, 30,000 jobs in about 6 to 8 months. So those were buildings that went up very quickly in the 40s. Compare that to maybe a building we might tear down in Madison off the university built in the 60s. That structure probably took a year and a half to build. So it's different quality concrete material, and so because of that makeup, it just seized up. It's literally creating a barrier, and that water has nowhere to go. Because they have to tear up the entire highway again to fix it, they just didn't have the dollars to do that. So this was a patch to get us through. And the nice part about this is none of my cars have been in for shock work yet this winter.
Any other questions? Yes, I also wanted to thank Mark Fry, Kurt Wenger for videoing and going live with their presentation today. Mark?
All right. Thank you. Professor Deller, this one's for you. And I just want to point out, Mr. McCumber from the town of Merrimack pointed to a room tax dispute with a local business there. And I know in the village of Sauk City, we put in water, sewer, roads for a business that didn't end up coming here. So one of the things I would like to discuss is how shifting the tax responsibility impact our economy. And if I could just point out 3 things, the dark store loophole and dark store theory, tax appeals are on the uptick. In Wisconsin in 1970, manufacturing and commercial property paid half of the property tax in the state, while homeowners and residential apartment owners paid the other half. That's what's going on in Minnesota today. It's a 50-50 proposition. In Wisconsin today, however, homeowners are paying nearly 70% of that responsibility, with a commercial share somewhere around 20%. In 2011 or 2012, the manufacturing and agricultural credit rolled up to about $300 million as of 2017. That reduced what would be owed by manufacturing or agriculture activities, and in many cases the credit will reduce the income taxes that they owe to 0. So if you look over time since the 70s, commercial has paid increasingly less and less of that responsibility for taxes. And last year, the new tax law, about 14 months ago, about $1.5 trillion, delivered huge gains to wealthy households and profitable corporations. And that tax law largely ignores the working class wages and delivers large tax cut to the most well-off. And just like in 2004 with the American Jobs Act, when these tax bills come up for discussion, corporations are promising jobs, right? And just like in 2004, companies like AT&T, GM, Ford, Capital One, they oftentimes lay off workers or use that money for stock buybacks. So I'm curious if you could tell me what are your observations and predictions for the working class who are largely getting squeezed out by this tax economy. Thank you.
How long have you got?
1 minute.
1 minute.
1 minute.
A lot of what, well, two things. One is a lot of what you're asking is an equity question. Is that a fair system to put up? And that's a political decision. I mean, the economics really doesn't have anything to say about, you know, what's fair and what's not fair. But from an economic perspective, I think that, you know, the Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce would love it if businesses paid no taxes in the state. And, you know, as a homeowner in Madison, I just paid my property tax bill. I don't like that. But that's me as a citizen. I think from an economic perspective, I think the taxes are killing businesses is too strong of an argument. If you look at most businesses in Wisconsin, most businesses are small businesses. And they're not really affected by taxes that much. Do they like paying the taxes? No, of course not. We always want to get this stuff for free. So from a small business perspective, which dominates the Wisconsin economy, the taxes are a bit oversold from an economic development perspective. But if I'm a business owner and I'm offered a tax cut, I'm going to take it. But is it really going to affect how I run my business? No. We did a survey of small rural manufacturers a number of years ago trying to get an idea on infrastructure investments. And it turned out that we asked a couple of different questions, and one was, you know, how important are taxes to you? Oh, extremely important. But when you kind of went deeper into the survey, into kind of some different scenarios that we offered, it turned out taxes didn't matter at all. What really mattered is the quality of life. I have my business here because I like living here, or I live here and I started my business here. Tools to marketing. That's a company with 20 employees. It's growing, and it was started in someone's home here in town. If you look at the majority of businesses that are here, they're here because the person who owns the business lives here. So they're looking at it from a two-edged sword. They're looking at it from a personal perspective of what do I want my community to look like, and then they're looking at it from a business perspective. And if they have a choice between, say, being in Madison where property taxes are sky high and relocating out here where property taxes are a little bit less, I'll move out here. But in the bigger scheme of things, I think the tax argument is oversold.
Thank you, Dr. Deller. If you need to go, you can go, but we are giving away a great basket. This is going to be the last question. You can email us your questions, and we will get your answers and publish them.
Just a quick question, kind of out-of-the-box thinking for open consideration. Anybody can answer this. What about the tiny house movement and the anecdotal evidence that millennials like that smaller space, 1,000 square foot and less? Why are we spending money on 300,000 plus and north in the West Wind District when we can take that same land space, put on tiny houses, create a community that will bring in the millennials and attract those people that we're after? Just a thought.
That's a possibility, but I think what it is when you think about rental development is the apartment complex that my daughter moved into. Those tend to be small apartments, but there's a really nice gym. There's a really nice indoor pool. The garage is heated. It's a nice place. And I think she would rather have a smaller living space and have those kind of amenities than have a big apartment. But it depends. Are you looking at single young professionals, or are you looking at folks with young families? They're going to be driven by very different things. Are you looking at empty nesters who want to downsize? So it really depends on what market are you going after. One quick question. I know you want to end, but one thing that I've been talking with communities around Wisconsin about housing issues is that one of the concerns is that we have housing stock, but it's not very good quality. And my question is, well, do you have building standards? Do you have building code? Do you have the authority to go in and tell that landowner, clean it up, or we're going to condemn it? And it's amazing how many elected officials, once you start to bring that up, private property rights are held in high regard. So one thing that you may want to think about that hasn't been talked about is to think about the current housing stock and what the municipality can do to improve the current housing stock. Maybe that's a low-interest loan to help do some remodeling. Maybe that's actually enforcing building code. And basically saying, if you don't clean up this property, we're going to condemn it. That's a pretty hard move, but it's something that is another tool in the toolbox that a lot of municipalities are very leery of using. But it's something to think about.
Thank you. Thank you. Good. Okay, great. And I'll ask Lauren Olson to come up. Have it. If you don't know, this is Lauren Olson from the Bank of Prairie du Sac. She's our marketing director, and she was very instrumental in putting today's presentation together with Twana and staff as well. So thank you. We have 2 prizes. The first one is a Bank of Prairie du Sac canvas bag with a hat. And the winner is Dick Gillen. And the second one is a gift card, and that goes to Joan Byer. Joan, I think you win every year. On behalf of everybody at the Bank of Prairie du Sac, we thank you for being here today, and we look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you so much.